Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to be looking at biofuels, and we're going to be considering, first of all, what is a biofuel? Let's describe biofuels and why they're being used, and let's then explain what the advantages and disadvantages of using biofuels are. And this will be specifically related to an area of India because that's what our case study is based on. So the area of India we're looking at is called Kerala, which is in the southwestern corner of India. So first of all, let's explore what is a biofuel. So a biofuel is a crop that is grown by a farmer in a field, but the crop is then turned into some sugar-based um, material or something like ethanol, which is then turned into some kind of fuel for either vehicles or for machines. So it's an alternative to using other energy sources like petroleum and oil-based energy sources. It's been widespread in South America, especially in Brazil, for many years, where sugarcane is grown by many farmers, and the sugarcane is then used to produce ethanol, which powers the majority of vehicles in Brazil. So that is a description of biofuels. So these are crops that are actually being grown by farmers to be turned into ethanol or some other fuel, which is then used to power vehicles or other machines. So what sort of biofuels are we talking about? Well, in India, the two main crops are jatropha and sugarcane. And both are grown because they can then be used to convert into an energy source. So now let's look at the second part of thinking about biofuels, which is not just describing what they are, but explaining issues that relate to them. So what we can do is we can start by looking at the disadvantages. So what are the disadvantages of using biofuels? Well, first of all, it means that farmers are no longer growing food for their own consumption. They're growing food for companies to turn into a fuel or to be exported to other countries. Now, what this means is there are food shortages if farmers start doing that. And India, if we remember, is one of the world's largest countries with over 1 billion people. And therefore, it's very reliant on the amount of food it produces. And if more and more land gets lost to the production of sugarcane and jatropha, then less and less rice and other crops will getting produced. So India might end up with even more food shortages than it currently has. Another problem is these two crops are very water intensive and require a lot of water to grow. So in a world of climate change and unpredictable monsoon weathers, which is what India is experiencing, that precious water that is needed by all areas of society is going to increasingly be used in farming, which either will create shortages in farming, which will affect the crops, or will create shortages in urban areas where most Indians live. Another issue is this increasingly is leading to even more destruction of the forests as more land is cleared to plant these crops, and that land tends to be forested land, and that is leading to increasing levels of greenhouse gases because, of course, without trees, there is less of ability for the planet to absorb carbon dioxide. But also the removal of trees, especially in the mountainous regions of India, is leading to increased soil erosion because once the tree is removed, the soil is then exposed to nature and is then washed away or blown away by the wind. Finally, it's actually quite an expensive fuel source to manufacture compared to other fuel sources. So here is some cartoons that kind of give us some of the ideas behind the issues of biofuels. And we in the developed world are really increasingly wanting to be green and use biofuels to power our vehicles and our machines. And because of that, there's an increased demand for these biofuels, which is putting pressure on many countries like India to produce more because they see profit in it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But the negative is the poor in India don't generally benefit from that increased profit. They just see less food being available to them because less food is now being grown by the big agribusinesses, the big commercial farming companies that operate in the large areas of India and grow these crops for biofuels. Right, let's look at the advantages. Well, it means that India no longer needs to import as much oil to drive its vehicles and also to power its power stations, because it's able to create its own fuel source by growing these crops. This means that energy is cheaper in parts of India. It's cheaper to fill up your car. It's cheaper to buy electricity because it's being run using native produced fuels rather than imported fuels. And that means that in general, people in India should get wealthier. Finally, um, it means that less greenhouse gases are manufactured from the burning of fossil fuels. So the fuel in a conventional engine would generate large amounts of carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide, which are greenhouse gases. But if you're using biofuels, overall that is less carbon-based gases going into the atmosphere. So that has a positive impact on climate change. Okay. The real debate here, though, and if you choose biofuels as a thing to write about in India, it's the balance between thinking about the issues of climate change and needing to move away from fossil fuel based sources of energy, but at the same time accepting the world's population is going to increase and we need to maximize the amount of food we produce. And unfortunately, biofuels, whilst solving one problem, seems to create another problem. That doesn't in itself mean that biofuels are a bad solution to the issue of climate change. You just need to think very carefully about how much you do and ensure that the production of biofuels from the crops you grow doesn't impact on people, especially leading to problems of hunger, as we are seeing in India.